to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of the Lost Seed series of historical fiction novels. The first book in the series is called The Beginning, and the series is a planned trilogy, as two more books, The Legacy and Reconciliation, are in the works. Her publishing company is called Dominion Asset Publishing. Her name is Teresa Mosley Sebastian, and here's my interview with Teresa. Teresa Mosley Sebastian, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
My first introductory question is going to be an open-ended one, so feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, well, you know my name, Aaron, Teresa Mosley Sebastian, and I am a relatively new author to the publishing world. However, I've been writing for most of my life, and I'm somewhat of a unicorn, or some people would say a chameleon, in that I've had quite a varied background. I started off in business and finance, moved on to law, and then kind of ascended the corporate ladder to being a corporate executive. And all along the way, I had an interest in writing and would make up stories for my children. And now I decided, because I could and had the time, I would write a fiction novel, because I've always been interested in making up stories, in my head, or just telling my children stories to go to bed. And so I put pen to paper and decided to publish my first book. And it is a trilogy, kind of a a story about a family saga, basically. And I am currently, we're currently working on getting the second book out, which should be out in the fall. The first book is called Lost Seeds, The Beginning, and the family saga is primarily focuses on two brothers who were born in the early 1900s to parents who were born in enslavement. And it's how the legacy of their parents' beginning follows them, and the two brothers end up going down different paths. And the decisions that the brothers make visit upon the next generation, and we will find out how that happens. So the first book takes place in the early 1900s. The second book takes place in 1960 to 1965, and the third book will take place in the 1980s. So, Aaron, that's a little bit about me. You said it was open-ended, and that's a little bit about the book.
Now, an interesting fact about you is that you're an attorney and a law school professor. What is your work as an attorney and a law school professor like?
Aaron, it is, as an attorney, I'm not a litigator. I am a transactional attorney. So I specialized in securities and finance. And what that means is when you see companies, large public companies that issue stock or bonds or other securities on the exchange, there's always a lawyer behind that. So I am that lawyer that was behind those kinds of transactions. And I ran large law departments for companies. Being a law professor, I teach accounting to lawyers. I also teach corporate compliance, and I teach risk management. So things that, the average individual does not typically see when they're watching movies or TV shows about lawyers. I'm that lawyer, again, that, is kind of behind the scenes. But when you think about mergers and acquisitions, or when you think about capital markets transactions, issuing stocks and bonds, then that's me.
The next several questions are going to be about the Lost Seed series, and you've already mentioned this a little bit in your introduction. Without spoiling too much about the first book in the Lost Seeds historical fiction series, which is the beginning, what is that about?
Well, again, think about back in the early 1900s when, there was a lot of change going on in our country. So, slavery had been abolished not too many decades before the 1900s. So many people were still alive. There was a lot of immigration, people coming over from Europe and other countries into the United States. So it was a lot of change taking place in our country at that time. And so you have these two brothers who are the first generation out of enslavement, but nevertheless, there's still a lot of dynamics going on socially here in the United States. So these brothers are trying to make their way in the world, not a lot of resources. And also you had, various things taking place in our country, such as racism, such as immigration, and people assimilating into this country. And so it's how these two brothers navigate all of those social stressors differently. One brother uses it to motivate himself. Excuse me. The other brother, not so much so. And he uh, has a very difficult time. So they end up going kind of in different directions, and that impacts their relationship as brothers. That impacts the relationship between the each brother and their mother, because their mother is also trying to struggle with her own issues, being a former uh, enslaved person. So she is now trying to reconcile some of the things that happened early in her life and how she was treated, not just as a person of color, but also a female. Because think about back in those times, in the early 1900s, females were seen very differently and had many different opportunities or lack thereof than they do now. So, so what you will see in the first book is how those characters navigate all of those things. There's a portion about love, a love relationship. There's a portion about stress between son and mother. And there's a portion about, being successful in beating the odds to achieve and find yourself a better life, which was a huge theme back at that time.
Two more books in the. Oh, wait a second. That's not quite the question. That's the next question. But the question before me now is, how long did it take you to write the first book in the series?
Oh my gosh, Aaron. The first book took several years, and it took several years because, I was also working at the time. And I, was doing it in starts and stops because it was a whole new thing for me. The good news, though, is I had the story in my head. The story actually came out of um, a mystery. For me, as a young child, it was a mystery. I had an uncle that lived in the back, a little house in the back of my grandparents' house. And we were not really allowed to interact with him because he had different issues. And so I always wondered what his life was about and why he didn't socialize with us, similar to other relatives. And so the story came somewhat easily because I finally released all of those curiosities onto the page. But again, it took several years because, I wrote a very, very long manuscript. And actually, I wrote the first two books all at the same time. So um, uh, after several years, I finally decided I needed to get someone, an editor, um, to help me take the next step to bring this book to the public. So uh, I got Kevin Anderson and Associates, and they um, helped edit the book. They found someone for me to partner with to publish the book and get the book out there. And so in all, that was about a 3-year journey. Writing was not difficult for me because as a lawyer, we're trained to write. We're trained to bring our thoughts and put them on paper. Plus, I was I've always been an avid reader of all kinds of things, fiction, nonfiction, whether it's Harry Potter or whether it's Toni Morrison or whether it's Shakespeare, or whether, it's a book about management, and like Good to Great or one of those kinds of books. Who Moved My Cheese? Another book that I enjoy reading, which is one of those business type books, but it's still a fiction story. But I just love to read. And so writing came very easily. But to answer your question, it took several years because there were just other competing priorities, Aaron.
Now I'm going to get to the question I was asking moments ago. Two more books in the Lost Seeds series are in the works: The Legacy and Reconciliation. Without spoiling too much about either upcoming book, what will each of them about, and how far along are you with each one?
Well, thanks for asking the question because the second one, The Legacy, will be out in the fall. The manuscript is complete. It's in the hands of the publishing company that is helping me get the book, out to the world. And it is, in a nutshell, it is about the offspring of the two brothers. The brothers' names are Dub and Tim. And so this is about how the legacy of what Dub and Tim go through or went through in the first book impacts the next generation. And so you will see how the next generation reacts to the way that Dub and Tim conduct their lives as a result of their beginnings, and the next generation internalizes and is impacted by some of that, and as a result, they're taking in the dynamics of what's going on in the world during the 60s, which, if you recall, there was the civil rights movement, there were women coming into their own, there was the Vietnam War. So you had that generation of individuals. So a lot was going on here in the United States in the 60s. And so the Dub and Tim's children are dealing with, again, a lot of external social changes going on, as well as the uh, how the trauma of Dub and Tim's beginnings impact how they conduct their lives as well. So to not give up the plot of the second book, you will see quite a family crisis that takes place, and how the different generations of Briscoes, Briscoe is their last name, how that generation of Briscoes react to it differently. Now, the last book, The Reconciliation, will basically focus on how all these decades of events that have taken place kind of come to a realization that some things need to be let go, and cannot continue haunting a family and the dynamics within the family. I'm sure you've heard the term dysfunctional family. And at some point, family dysfunctions need to be resolved so that it doesn't continue oppressing the success and the progress of the family.
How did your background, upbringing, and family history influence the writing of the Lost Seed series, if any of those influenced your writing of the series?
It absolutely did impact because I'm a product of the 50s and 60s. And Aaron, I heard a lot of stories from my grandparents who were born in the era of Dub and Tim Briscoe. They were born in the early 1900s. So my grandparents, both my maternal and paternal grandparents, were very ambitious. They were very focused on making sure that their children did better economically and socially. Both sets of grandparents were very much involved in the African American community and making sure that their children were educated and had opportunities. So both my grandparents were educated themselves, and they assured that their children were, and they impressed upon their grandchildren to be the same. So, as you could see, that forms a strong theme within my books and the family saga, the trilogy, of people that are seeking to, be successful and elevate themselves from their circumstances. And, that is a huge American story, whether are African American or whether your roots lie in other countries and your families immigrated during that time. Everyone wanted to climb the ladder here in the United States. And unfortunately, especially during that time, some cultures and races had disadvantages. And how did they deal with that on top of just the normal desires to move up in the world? So you will see a theme there too about how racism and other prejudices that exist and to some extent still exist impacts a person's ability to be successful. If we think about even other individuals coming from other countries, there were, back at that time, there were certain cultures that were not necessarily treated well here in the United States either. So some of that is dealt with in the book. But the underlying theme is that many people and many families have struggled over the generations against social disadvantages to find success here in the United States. So my family was very similar in that regard, where each generation has improved themselves. So that formed, my personal experience and my family's experience formed a very strong theme. And I drew from that for purposes of the book.
Why did you decide to write a historical fiction series about a strained relationship between brothers, and what drew you to write historical fiction?
Um, what drew me to write about male protagonists was because uh, I am very fascinated in hearing the experiences of my grandfather and my father. I also was drawn to write this because, again, I think that it is a story that we can learn from history. We need to not repeat the negatives of history and take those lessons to improve the future. I believe it's a mistake if we as a country don't heed the truth about history. Um, because if we don't heed the truth about history, we are bound to repeat it and we will lose progress. So I think history is important, the truth of history, even if it's painful, even if it's ugly, even if it makes us uncomfortable, we have to face it. It's think about your own life, our own lives. We make mistakes. We make wrong decisions. We don't always act in the way that we should act given the circumstances. But what we do is we say, okay, what worked well, what didn't work so well, how can I improve? And that will make me a better person. Well, the same thing is can be said about where we are as a people and as a country. Learn from the good, bad, and ugly of our history and be honest about it and move forward and become a better society. So that's what drives me to write about history because it's the basis upon which we can learn.
Did you learn anything about writing while writing the first book in the series that you were able to apply to the next two books in the series?
Absolutely, Aaron, I did. Um, I one thing that I learned is I hear voices in my head and I hear dialogue, a lot of dialogue in my head, and I write the dialogue. And what I learned from working with the editor is to also stop and look around and see the scene, the scenery, the backdrop, the emotions, and so I learned to listen to that and make sure that that environment is reflected in the words as well, so that my readers can see, I can see the scene, I can see the environment, I can feel the emotions. Um, and sometimes in your writing, I am so eager to capture the voices um, that I've learned to go ahead, feel free to capture those voices, but also go back and take time to craft the scene to give your reader, allow your reader to also be in that same space with you, to understand why your characters are doing what they're doing. How are they reacting to their environment? What are those emotions that are going on? Um, you know, as they are interacting with each other or interacting with their environment. So, um, the writing now is my process is a little more efficient. It's like anything else. The more you do, the easier it comes. And I was actually at a James Patterson lecture um, about a month ago, and just listening to his writing process was fascinating. And he works on several mini manuscripts at one time. He has many outlines that he is working on, And it's kind of like myself, how I have a lot of things in my head. What I need to do is start dialing down on a lot of other things that I do, other jobs that I have. I shouldn't say jobs because I really don't have a job. I have a company, but um, I need to make more time to write because I come up with a lot of stories. Unfortunately, a lot of them are still locked in a file drawer in my head. So I'm going to start giving myself more permission to spend more time writing, and feel free to start and stop on several different thoughts to make sure I capture all these stories. So I'm not so linear in my production of work.
I apologize for the cell phone notification that went off a few seconds ago. Your publishing company is Dominion Asset Publishing. Does Dominion Asset just publish books that you write, or does Dominion Asset publish books written by other authors as well?
Right now, it's only publishing books that I write. I'm a lawyer, I'm a business person, and so I, structure any work that I do, whether it's, the the angel investment firm that I have, and other things. I've learned as a lawyer to segregate them from a legal perspective. So it is just the conduit for my work. It's there for not just only legal purposes. It's there also for estate purposes. So I partner with right now Girl Friday Productions to get my books out there.
Do you believe that diversity and diverse perspectives are necessary in the book writing and publishing industries? And if so, why?
Do I believe that diverse perspectives are necessary? Here's the way I would frame it, Aaron, is that when anyone writes, um, they are bringing forth something within them, and every perspective is unique. Um, so in the publishing world, um, I prefer to make sure that my book is well represented, and marketed in a way that will allow it to get out to its desired audience. And I don't always define, as a writer, I can't define who that audience is because art is so subjective. Um, I believe that it's important for writers to work with people that understand their work, to help represent their work and get their work out there, um, in a way that projects what the book is really about. Um, I think when I think about my own books, or let's think of Maya Angelou or Toni Morrison, the people that represent those books or that like those books or read those books would certainly be an audience for my book. Now, let's think about Shakespeare, right? Um, there are people that would not touch a Shakespeare, but I would. I love it. And so people that appreciate that type of writing, that type of reading, um, uh, should help get that book out there. So to get back to your question, um, every book is unique and represents the thoughts and the background and um, the way that that writer sees the world. So um, just in and of itself, the the profession of writing and the world of writing um, embraces and requires diversity in the sense of making sure that a book is understood given the person that wrote it and given the audience that will benefit from it. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but it was a good question and quite a challenging one.
Teresa, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You were an amazing guest.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and thank you for having me. I also want to say, though, Aaron, in the few minutes that we have left, is people could certainly learn more about the book on teresamosleysebastian.com. They can also find us on tmsebast at .author on Instagram, and also find us on Facebook. But if you go to the website has links to our Instagram and our Facebook page, and you can read more about the characters. You can read a couple of blogs. I think I need to write another blog and update that. And also they could find the book on Amazon and bookshop.org and also Barnes and Noble. But thank you so much, Aaron, for taking an interest in my writing.
It was wonderful to interview Teresa, especially since historical fiction is a genre I'm very interested in. I wish Teresa well with the next 2 books in the Lost Seeds trilogy. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.